The bell that dismissed us from the annual pack gathering wasn't a sound. It was a sigh of collective relief, a release of tension so thick you could choke on it. I kept my eyes on the worn stone floor of the great hall, counting the cracks radiating from my scuffed boots. 10 cracks, 11, my ritual, my shield. Around me, the rustle of fine silks and the clatter of dress boots began as the higher ranks moved first. Whispers like vipers slithered through the air. Another year, another gathering. Did you see the Alpha King? He looked right through me. They all do, Kaelen. To them, I'm not a who. I'm a what, the Omega, the last, the burden. My name is Kaelen. And in the Shadowfen pack, an Omega isn't just the bottom of the hierarchy. We're the footnote, the afterthought, the living reminder of what the pack considers weakness. Our strength isn't in muscle or dominance, it's in calming, in healing, in sensing the emotional currents others ignore. A utility. A tool to be kept in the shed until needed. The hall emptied around me. I waited, as always, Omega's exit last, an unspoken law as rigid as the moon's pull. Finally, silence. I lifted my head. The vast hall was empty save for the lingering scent of pine, power, and petty ambition. The high table at the far end, where Alpha King Alistair and his betas had sat, seemed a continent away. His presence had been a physical weight, a silent storm contained in a man. He hadn't looked at me, not once. Why would he? I took a step toward the giant oak doors, then another. My footsteps echoed, a lonely heartbeat in the cavernous space. Just as my hand touched the cold iron handle, a scent hit me. Not the fading traces of the pack, something new, metallic, salty, pain. It came from the corridor leading to the western gardens, a servant's passage. Without thinking, my feet changed course. This was the other unspoken law, the Omega's duty, to tend, to soothe. The scent led me to a small, snowy courtyard used for storing firewood. A figure was hunched over behind a stack of logs, shoulders shaking. Liana, a young Delta, barely 16, who worked in the kitchens. Her hand was clamped over her forearm, blood welling between her fingers, dripping onto the pristine snow, crimson on white. Liana, let me see. She jumped, her eyes wide with pain and fear. Kaelen, I'm sorry, I was just chopping kindling and the axe slipped. I'll clean it, I promise. Shhh, it's all right, the cut is what matters, not the mess. I knelt beside her, the snow soaking through my thin trousers. Gently I pried her hand away. It was a nasty gash, deep and clean. She flinched. Closing my eyes, I placed my hands over the wound, not touching it. I reached for the calm inside me, the still pool of my Omega energy. I visualized the skin knitting, the pain receding like a tide. My hands grew warm. A soft, silvery glow, visible only to me and the injured, emanated from my palms. It was the glow of concentrated empathy, of borrowed peace. Liana's breathing slowed. The tension bled from her shoulders. When I opened my eyes, the bleeding had stopped, the wound closed into a fresh pink scar. She stared, her eyes brimming with tears of relief. Thank you, she whispered. The head beta, he said if I caused trouble or was clumsy again, I know. You don't have to say it. I helped her up. Go back inside, tell no one it was just a scratch. She nodded fervently and scurried off, casting a grateful look over her shoulder. I remained in the courtyard, the cold finally seeping into my bones. Using my energy always left me hollow, a little colder. This was my purpose, hidden, unthanked, a touching display. The voice was like granite, smooth and immovable. It came from the shadowed archway. My heart seized. I knew that voice. Everyone did. Slowly I turned. Alpha King Alistair stood there, having entered without a sound. He wasn't a large man, not in the bulky sense of some alphas. He was all lean power and coiled grace, like a glacier hiding a mountain's force. His dark hair was swept back, his eyes the color of a winter sky, pale, piercing, and utterly devoid of the warmth I had just poured into Liana. He wore simple black, but the authority around him was a heavier cloak than any fur. He was alone. I dropped my gaze immediately, my spine bowing into a submissive posture ingrained since childhood. My king, I didn't know you were there. Obviously. He took a step into the courtyard, his boots crunched on the snow, each step a measured decree. Does the head beta know his kitchen staff is being tended to by the pack Omega after hours? She was hurt, it was my duty to help. The words were out before I could temper them. A flicker of something, anger, sparked in the hollow of my chest. Your duty, he repeated, his tone flat. He stopped a few feet away. His scent washed over me, frost, ancient cedar, and the sharp, clean edge of absolute authority. It was overwhelming. Your duty, as decreed by pack law, is to remain in the Omega quarters unless summoned for a pack-wide calming, not to skulk in courtyards practicing unlicensed healing. The law also says we are to aid any pack member in distress. She was in distress. Was I to let her bleed out for fear of a reprimand? My voice trembled. I had never spoken this many words to him or to any alpha of his rank. I was crossing a line, and the abyss beneath it felt bottomless. He was silent for a long moment. The silence was worse than any shout. Look at me, Omega. The command was quiet, but it pulled at my very core, an alpha order I had no power to resist. My head lifted against my will, our eyes met. His gaze wasn't angry, it was assessing, as if he were seeing a strange, faintly interesting insect. He looked from my face to my hands, still faintly tinged with the residue of healing energy. You healed her completely, he stated. That is a rare skill, even for an Omega. Most can only slow bleeding or ease pain. I did what I could, my king. You did more than you should. He took another step closer. Now I could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the impossible weight he carried. What is your name? The question stunned me. He didn't know, of course he didn't. Kaelen, I breathed. Kaelen. He said my name as if testing its weight. You have a defiance in you, it's poorly hidden, that is dangerous. He turned to leave, then paused, his broad back to me. The moon gaze ceremony is in 3 days. All unmated Omegas are to attend. The blood drained from my face. The moon gaze, a barbaric ritual where unmated alphas and high-ranking betas could consider the unmated Omegas. It was a meat market dressed in tradition, my greatest dread. I am aware, my king. See that you are, he said, his voice fading as he moved back into the shadows. And Kaelen, yes, my king, do not be late. And he was gone as silently as he had appeared. I stood there, shivering violently, though the cold was the least of it. He had seen me, truly seen me, not as furniture, but as a person who had broken a rule, a person with defiance. A person with a name, and in the world of Shadowfen, being noticed by the Alpha King was not a blessing. It was a sentence. I took a step forward, my legs weak, then another. I had to get back to the Omega quarters, to the tiny, shared room that was my world, but the path ahead felt different now. The shadows seemed deeper, the air sharper. He knew my name. And in 3 days, under the full moon, I would have to stand before him, before all of them, and be gazed upon. A piece of meat for the wolves. As I walked, a strange, traitorous thought unfurled in the chill he had left behind. When our eyes met, for the briefest second before the terror set in, I hadn't seen cruelty in his wintry gaze. I had seen a reflection of my own loneliness, but that was surely just the fear talking, wasn't it? The walk back to the Omega quarters was a blur of icy pathways and darker shadows. His words looped in my mind, a chilling mantra. You have a defiance in you, it's poorly hidden. He saw it, no one ever saw it. I had spent a lifetime sanding down my edges, making myself small and smooth and unnoticeable. But one look, one moment in a snowy courtyard, and the Alpha King had seen the ragged truth I tried so hard to conceal. The Omega quarters weren't in the dungeons, but they might as well have been. A low stone annex attached to the main pack house, always cold, always smelling of damp wool and dried herbs. My space was a narrow cot at the end of a long dormitory shared with 5 others. Ilara, the eldest, was already there, mending a tunic by the weak light of a single oil lamp. She glanced up as I entered, her keen old eyes missing nothing. You're late. And you look like you've seen a ghost. I'm fine, I muttered, shrugging off my thin coat, just the cold. Cold doesn't put that shadow in your eyes, boy. She set her mending aside. Out with it. Ilara was the closest thing I had to family. She had been an Omega for 60 years. She had a calm that was like bedrock and a wisdom that saw through every pretense. I couldn't lie to her. I sank onto my cot, the straw mattress crackling. I healed Liana, the Delta from the kitchens, in the western woodyard. Ilara nodded slowly, and the Alpha King saw me. The silence that followed was profound. The very air seemed to stiffen. Ilara's wrinkled face went still. He spoke to you. He did. He said I was practicing unlicensed healing, that I was skulking. I swallowed, the memory of his voice tightening my throat. He asked my name. Her sharp intake of breath was the only sign of her shock. He asked for your name. He did, and he told me not to be late for the moon gaze. Ilara leaned back, her gaze turning inward, looking at some old memory. A name is a powerful thing, Kaelen. For an Alpha King to ask for an Omega's name, it is not a casual gesture. It is an act of recognition. And recognition from such a height is dangerous. It draws the eyes of others. I didn't want it, I whispered, the hollow feeling from the healing deepening into a chasm. I just wanted to help Liana. I know, child. But our wants are the smallest part of this world. She leaned forward, her voice dropping. The moon gaze is now a battlefield for you. You must be invisible. Keep your gaze down. Do nothing to stand out. He may have seen your defiance, but you must show him only submission now. Let him forget the Omega in the courtyard. How can he forget? He remembered my name. Then you must make him wish to forget it. Her words were hard, but her eyes were sad. Survival is not about pride, Kaelen. It is about enduring. I lay awake long after the lamp was extinguished and the soft snores of the others filled the dark room. Ilara's advice was the voice of experience, of a long life lived in the margins. It was the only sensible path, but a tiny, stubborn ember in my chest refused to go out. He hadn't sounded angry, he had sounded curious. And in that moment our eyes locked. I hadn't felt the usual crushing pressure of an alpha's will. I had felt seen, truly, terribly seen. It was terrifying, but it was also the most real moment of my entire existence. The 3 days passed with the slow, grinding dread of an approaching storm. The pack house buzzed with a different energy. The moon gaze wasn't just for Omegas, it was a political event, a chance for alliances to be suggested, for status to be displayed. The air smelled of perfume, polish, and ambition. We were prepped. Our threadbare usual clothes were taken away, and we were given simple, off-white tunics and trousers. To present a picture of purity, Beta Gareth, the efficient, had sneered as he oversaw the distribution. Not that it matters for most of you. We were paraded to a separate, slightly better quarter, a gilded cage for the occasion, a room with actual windows, though they were high and barred. We were fed plain broth and dry bread. We were instructed in the ritual, the slow walk across the great hall, the stand upon the mark of the new moon, the lowering of the head, the absolute silence. Any Omega who speaks, who lifts their gaze without command, who displays anything less than grateful submission will be removed, Gareth intoned, and you do not want to know what removed entails. On the evening of the 3rd day, as the sun bled orange behind the mountains, they came for us. We were lined up in the corridor, a pathetic line of white-clad ghosts. I was placed squarely in the middle, not first, not last, invisible. From the great hall I could hear the rumble of voices, the clink of glasses, the low thrum of dominant auras pressing against the doors. My heart hammered against my ribs. I focused on the crack in the stone floor between my feet. 10 cracks, 11. The massive doors swung open. The noise in the wall of scent hit me like a physical blow. Musk, leather, spice, wine, and raw power. The hall was lit by 1,000 candles, and at the far end, on his raised dais, sat Alpha King Alistair. He was a statue carved from shadow and silver, his expression unreadable from this distance. The music began, a slow, dirge-like drumbeat. The first Omega in line, a timid boy named Rin, started his walk. The chatter died to a murmur. I kept my eyes on Rin's retreating heels. One by one they walked. One by one they stood on the mark, a circle of black obsidian inlaid in the floor. The alphas and high betas seated at long tables on either side watched, their eyes like hawks. Sometimes a whispered comment would pass, a low chuckle. No one was chosen, not yet. This was just the viewing. Then it was my turn. My feet moved of their own accord. The sea of faces on either side was a blur of color and sharp, evaluating eyes. I felt their gazes like pinpricks on my skin, invisible. Be invisible, I focused on the mark, growing larger with each step. I could feel the weight of the dais ahead, the specific, piercing chill of one particular gaze. I reached the mark and stepped onto it. The obsidian was cold even through my thin soles. I lowered my head, fixing my eyes on the polished stone. The drumbeat stopped. Silence, thick and suffocating, filled the hall. I could feel him looking at me. King Alistair. It was a distinct pressure, a pinpoint of cold focus amidst the vague heat of the other stairs. A voice rang out from the left table. Beta Jackson, a brute of a man with a cruel smile. This one, the scrawny one in the middle, look up, Omega. My blood turned to ice. This wasn't part of the ritual. We were only to look up if directly commanded by the king or the officiant. A ripple of interest went through the crowd. Did you not hear me, Omega? Jackson's voice hardened. I said, look up. I remained frozen. To obey him was to break protocol, to invite punishment. To disobey him was to insult a high beta, a trap with no escape. The silence stretched, taut as a bowstring. Then a new voice, quiet, but it cut through the hall like a knife through velvet. You overreach, Jackson. It was the Alpha King. He hadn't moved. His voice was conversational, but it held a finality that silenced the very air. The Omegas are under my gaze, not yours. You will not speak to them again. A stunned hush fell. Jackson's face mottled with rage and humiliation, but he dipped his head. Of course, my king, my apologies. My knees were trembling. I kept my head down. Omega, the king said, his voice now directed at me. It wasn't loud, but it vibrated in my bones. You may lift your head. Slowly, I did. My eyes traveled up over the polished boots on the dais, the dark trousers, the elegant silver-buttoned tunic, and finally to his face. His winter sky eyes were directly on me. There was no kindness there, but there was a fierce, unwavering attention. He was studying me as if confirming something he'd seen in the courtyard. The moon gaze recognizes potential, he said, his words meant for the whole hall, but his eyes locked on mine. It recognizes value that is not always obvious. It is a reminder that strength has many forms. He held my gaze for a heartbeat longer, a moment that felt like an eternity, before his eyes swept dismissively away. Proceed. The drumbeat started again, a signal for me to move off the mark and make way for the next Omega. I walked on legs of water, my mind reeling. He had shielded me. He had publicly rebuked a high beta to shield an Omega. The message was not one of kindness, but of possession. This one is under my eye. I was not invisible, not anymore. And as I reached the far end of the hall, taking my place with the others who had finished the walk, I felt the weight of 100 new stares. Curious, jealous, hostile. The king's intervention hadn't saved me. It had marked me. The gilded cage was gone. I was now in a glass box, and every wolf in the forest was looking in. The morning after the moon gaze, the world had changed. In the Omega quarters, the others gave me a wide berth. Whispers stopped when I approached. Even Alara looked at me with a new, complex worry. I was no longer just Kaelen. I was the Omega the king had spoken for. I was assigned to my usual duties, sorting medicinal herbs in the storeroom, but Beta Gareth himself delivered the task, his lips pinched in displeasure. Keep your head down and work, he snapped. Your notoriety does not excuse laziness. I was glad for the solitude of the storeroom, for the dusty, calming sense of lavender, witch hazel, and dried moss. I lost myself in the rhythm of sorting, the simple, tangible work a balm to my churning thoughts. The door creaked open. I expected Gareth come to check on me, but the scent that filled the small room was one I didn't recognize, cloying jasmine and something sharper, like ozone. A woman stood in the doorway. She was beautiful in a severe, polished way, with raven hair coiled tightly and eyes like chips of flint. She wore the deep blue of a senior beta. Lyra, the king's head of household. Kaelen, she stated, her voice crisp. I set down my herbs and bowed my head. Beta Lyra, His Majesty has requested your presence. My heart stuttered. Now, for what purpose? Her flinty eyes narrowed. The king's purposes are not for Omegas to question. Come and do not keep him waiting. She turned on her heel, expecting obedience. I followed, my palms slick with sweat. We didn't go to the great hall or the throne room. She led me through a series of private corridors I had never seen, deeper into the heart of the pack house. The air grew warmer, the stonework finer, hung with tapestries depicting epic hunts and historic battles. We stopped before a heavy oak door. Lyra knocked once sharply. Enter. The voice from within was his. She opened the door and gestured for me to go in, closing it behind me, remaining outside. I found myself in a study, not a throne room. It was a space of quiet power. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling. A large, worn desk dominated the room, piled with papers and maps. A fire crackled in a grand hearth, and before it, standing with his back to me, was Alpha King Alistair. He was out of his formal wear, in a simple gray shirt and dark trousers. He looked less like a statue and more like a man, though the aura of command was undiminished. He was studying a large map pinned to the wall. "Come here, Kaelen." I walked forward, stopping a respectful distance from the desk. He turned. In the daylight from the tall window, his eyes were even paler, more intense. "You healed a delta 3 days ago," he began without preamble. "You displayed a level of skill that is uncommon. Yesterday you showed a spine of tempered steel by refusing Jackson's illegal command, even though it terrified you. 2 anomalies. I said nothing, there was nothing to say. I have a 3rd anomaly for you," he said, walking to his desk. He picked up a small, velvet pouch and tossed it to me. I fumbled but caught it. It was heavy. "Open it." With trembling fingers, I loosened the drawstring and tipped the contents into my palm. A pendant slid out. A simple, perfect teardrop of moonstone set in a band of dark, unadorned iron. It was beautiful in its starkness. It hummed with a low, cool energy against my skin. "It is a focusing stone," he said, watching my reaction. "For an Omega with your latent strength, it will help you channel your empathic abilities without draining yourself to the point of collapse. It will also mute the emotional noise of the pack around you, give you some peace." I stared at the stone, then at him, utterly bewildered. "My king, I cannot accept this, it's too valuable." "It is not a gift," he interrupted, his voice turning cold. "It is a tool, and you are being given a task." The warmth I'd momentarily felt vanished. Of course, nothing was given freely here. "There is a sickness in the southern border patrols," he said, returning to his map. "A lethargy, a weakness of the will. The healers suspect a poison but cannot identify it. It is not physical. It is a sickness of the spirit." He looked back at me. "I believe it is a psychic malaise, perhaps inflicted by a rogue pack with a gift for manipulation. I need you to go there, use your empathy, use the stone, diagnose it, heal it if you can." The enormity of the task crashed over me. "You want me to go to a border outpost, to work among alphas and warriors. You will be under the protection of a unit I trust. Captain Raven, you leave at dawn." His tone brooked no argument. "The stone is to aid your work and to shield you. Do not see it as jewelry, see it as armor." He was sending me away. Was this a punishment for the attention at the moon gaze? Or was it, as he said, simply using a tool for a needed task? Am I being sent away from the pack house, my king? I dared to ask. He finally looked at me fully, and in his gaze I saw not anger but a profound, weary frustration. You are the most visible Omega in this pack right now, Kaelen. Jackson's faction is displeased, others are curious. This room is the only place I can guarantee your safety. The border is safer for you than your own quarters. This task is your protection. Do you understand? A strange, reluctant understanding dawned. He wasn't rewarding me, he was hiding me. The pendant in my hand felt suddenly different, not a reward but a lifeline. A piece of armor, as he said. I understand, I whispered. Good, Lyra will provide you with suitable clothes and supplies. Be ready at the east gate at dawn. He turned back to his map, a clear dismissal, and wear the stone, always. I closed my fingers around the moonstone. It was cool, calming, an unwanted gift for an impossible task. But as I left his study, the hostile eyes of the pack house seemed to watch from every shadow. He was right. The border, for all its danger, felt less threatening than the den of wolves I was leaving behind. I had taken a step forward and the pack had stepped back. Now the Alpha King was sending me into the unknown, and I had no choice but to go. Dawn was a gray smear on the horizon when I arrived at the east gate. I wore the sturdy, travel-worn clothes Lyra had provided, plain woolens and a thick cloak. The moonstone pendant hung hidden beneath my tunic, a cool secret against my chest. I carried a small pack with basic healing herbs and my few personal items. A unit of 5 warriors was already mounted, their breath-making plumes in the cold air. They were all betas, hard-eyed and efficient. At their head was a man who could only be Captain Raven. He was not as tall as the king, but broader, built like a fortress. His face was a landscape of old scars and grim patience, his hair shot through with steel gray. He looked at me with an expression of pure, unvarnished skepticism. You the Omega, he grunted. I am Kaelen, he says you're to come, so you come, you ride with me, don't slow us down, don't wander off, and for the moon's sake, if you sense anything, speak up. This isn't a picnic. He gestured to a sturdy, placid-looking mare. That's yours. Try not to fall off. The journey was a lesson in silence and endurance. We moved at a brisk pace, leaving the ordered lands of the central pack and entering the wild, forested foothills that led to the southern border. The warriors spoke little and never to me. I was a piece of cargo, a strange, fragile tool they were obligated to deliver. As we rode, I became aware of the moonstone's effect. Usually the close proximity to so many dominant auras would have been a constant, buzzing pressure in my skull, a mix of aggression, focus, and simmering tension. Now it was muted. I could still sense them, but it was like hearing voices through a thick wall. The stone gave me a bubble of quiet. For the first time, I could think without the emotional static of the pack pressing in. It was a profound relief. On the second day, we entered the pine forests that marked the edge of Shadowfen territory. The air grew colder, sharper. The sense of watchfulness from the warriors intensified. Raven called a halt by a frozen stream. From here, we're in contested space, he said, his voice low. The sickness is at Blackstone Outpost, another half-day's ride. Keep your senses sharp, Omega. The enemy here isn't just disease. We mounted up again. I found my eyes scanning the dark spaces between the trees, my Omega senses, sharpened by the quiet within me, stretching out. I felt the usual life of the forest, the sleepy thoughts of hibernating creatures, the slow pulse of the earth. But then, something else. A thread of wrongness, not a scent, not a sound, a feeling, a cold, oily residue of despair that clung to the path we were on. I tugged my mare closer to Raven. Captain. He glanced at me, irritation flashing in his eyes. What? There's something. A feeling off the path to the left, it's old but it's strong, despair and malice. He raised a fist, halting the column instantly. His skeptical look was gone, replaced by pure tactical focus. How far? 100 paces maybe, it's not a person. It's like an echo. He gestured to 2 of his warriors. They dismounted, drawing weapons, and melted into the trees in the direction I'd indicated. The rest of us waited, tense. The silence was absolute. Minutes later, one of them returned, his face grim. A burial site, Captain, shallow, 3 hours from the last patrol before the sickness hit. Their badges are gone, taken as trophies. Ravan's jaw tightened. He looked back at me, his gaze now assessing in a completely new way. You felt that there, despair. I nodded, my throat tight. The echo of their final moments had been faint but horrifying. The king said you were a sensitive, Ravan muttered, more to himself than to me. All right, we keep moving, double watch. We rode on, but the atmosphere had shifted. The warriors no longer looked through me. I caught them glancing at me, their expressions wary but with a new hint of respect. I had proven my use. By late afternoon, we reached Blackstone Outpost. It was a grim place, a fortified camp of rough-hewn log walls built into the side of a mountain pass. The banners of Shadowfen hung limp in the still air, but the silence was the worst part. No challenge from the watchtower, no sounds of drilling or activity from within. Ravan called out and the heavy gate swung open. The sight inside made my stomach clench. Warriors, proud Shadowfen border guards, lounged listlessly against walls or sat staring into nothing. Their eyes were hollow, their auras dim and frayed. The place didn't smell of sickness, but of apathy, of hope extinguished. It was a fortress of broken spirits. A lieutenant, a man who should have been vibrant with authority, shuffled forward. Captain Ravan, you're here, he sent the specialist. His eyes slid over me, too weary to even show surprise. This is Kaelen, Ravan said, his voice uncharacteristically gentle. He's here to help. The lieutenant just nodded as if he no longer believed help was possible. I dismounted, the moonstone feeling heavy under my clothes. This was the sickness, this deep psychic wound. I looked at the hollow faces around me, at the despair that hung thicker than the mountain fog. The Alpha King's task was no longer an abstract order. It was a wall of suffering right in front of me. And I had no idea if I, or my unwanted gift, were strong enough to make a dent in it. Ravan secured me a small, private hut at the edge of the outpost, a former storage shed, but it was clean and, most importantly, separate. You'll need quiet to do your work, he said, his earlier skepticism now a gruff pragmatism. No one will disturb you. What do you need first? To understand it, I said, my eyes still on the listless warriors in the courtyard. I need to sense it directly. Not from a distance, he nodded. I'll have Lieutenant Kaelen sent to you. He's been hit the worst, but he's also the strongest. If anyone can hold it together to give you answers, it's him. While I waited, I unpacked my few things. I took out the moonstone pendant and held it, feeling its steady, calming pulse. It was an anchor in the overwhelming sea of despair that lapped at the edges of my awareness. I slipped it over my head, tucking it inside my tunic. The muted quiet it provided was the only thing making this bearable. Kaelen arrived shortly after. He was a tall man, or had been, before his shoulders slumped under an invisible weight. His eyes were the color of tarnished silver, clouded with a fatigue that had nothing to do with lack of sleep. Lieutenant, I said, gesturing to a stool, please sit, I'm Kaelen. He sat heavily as if the act required immense effort. The Omega. They say you can heal minds. I can try to understand what's hurting yours, I said carefully. May I need to, sense your emotional state, it won't hurt. He gave a slow, resigned nod. I pulled my own stool close and sat facing him. I closed my eyes, reaching for my inner calm, the still pool. With the moonstone's focus, it was easier to find. Then, gently, I extended my senses toward Kaelen. It was like stepping into a blizzard of gray ash. Where a healthy warrior's spirit should have been a landscape of disciplined focus, loyalty, and controlled fire, Kaelen's was a wasteland. The dominant emotions were a crushing, hollow despair and a soul-deep apathy, but woven through it like black veins in marble was something else, something foreign and venomous. A psychic residue, sticky and dark, that whispered lies directly into the core of his being. You are weak, your pack has forgotten you. Your alpha does not care if you live or die. Your fight is meaningless, just let go, just sleep. I recoiled internally, breaking the connection with a gasp. My hands were trembling. Kaelen opened his eyes, seeing my reaction. A flicker of something pain, recognition crossed his face. "You see it. It's not a sickness you caught," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "It's an attack. A psychic poison. Someone is projecting this despair. It clings to you and it feeds on your own doubts, your own fears, amplifying them until they drown out everything else." He nodded slowly. "It started about 3 weeks ago. A patrol came back, quiet. The next day, more of us felt it, like a fog rolling in, but a fog that gets inside your head and tells you the worst things you've ever thought about yourself in your own voice." "Where is the strongest point of it?" I asked. "Where did it start? The old watchtower," he said, "the one that looks over the Serpent's Pass. The first patrol that was affected had been stationed there for a night. That was my starting point." I told Raven, and despite his clear misgivings, he agreed to take me there at first light with a small escort. "It could be a trap," he warned. "Everything here is a trap," I replied, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. "But the source is there." "I'm sure of it." That night, sleep was impossible. The collective despair of the outpost pressed against the bubble the moonstone provided. I could feel the black tendrils of the psychic attack coiling at the edges of the camp, probing for weakness. I clutched the pendant, focusing on its cool, clear light. I thought of the Alpha King's words, "See it as armor," but armor couldn't fight this. I needed a weapon, and the only weapon I had was my empathy itself. The thought terrified me. To fight this darkness, I would have to open myself to it. At dawn, Raven, 2 warriors, and I rode to the old watchtower. It was a crumbling stone finger pointing at the leaden sky, perched on the edge of a dizzying cliff overlooking a narrow, treacherous pass. The sense of wrongness was palpable long before we reached it. The very air felt bruised. "We'll wait here," Raven said, dismounting at the tree line. "You have 1 hour. If you scream, we come running, but I can't promise what state we'll be in if we enter that." I nodded, my mouth dry. I dismounted and walked alone toward the tower. With each step, the psychic pressure increased. The whispers started, not in my ears, but in my mind, using my own fears as a template. "You're a fool. They left you here to die. Alistair sent you away to be rid of you. You are nothing. Your power is a parlor trick. You will fail, and they will all die because of your weakness." I stopped, gripping the moonstone so hard the iron band dug into my palm. The pain was an anchor. I focused on it, then pushed deeper. I entered the ruin of the tower's base. In the center of the floor, partially hidden by rubble, was the source. Not a person, but an object. A jagged obsidian shard pulsing with a sick violet light. It was etched with runes I didn't recognize. It was a psychic landmine left here to slowly bleed its poison into the land and any mind sensitive enough to receive it. This was no natural malaise. This was crafted malice, an act of war. I knelt before it, revolted. To disarm it, I would have to touch its energy, to counter its despair with something stronger. I thought of the pack, not as it was now, but as it could be. I thought of Liana's grateful tears, of Alara's steadfast wisdom, of the unyielding strength in Raven's grizzled face. I thought of the Alpha King's wintry eyes, not filled with cruelty, but with the immense, lonely weight of duty. And I found, beneath my fear, a spark, not of dominance but of conviction, a defiant, quiet love for my pack, even if it never loved me back. I wrapped that spark around me like a cloak. I reached out, not with my hand, but with my spirit, and I laid it against the pulsating black shard. The backlash was immediate and agonizing. A torrent of pure hatred and despair screamed into my mind, trying to extinguish my fragile light. The moonstone grew hot against my chest, a conduit, not just a shield. It amplified my own emotional energy, my will to heal, my refusal to let this darkness win. It was a silent, brutal war fought on a battlefield no one could see. I poured every ounce of my empathy, my calm, my newfound defiance into the shard. I didn't attack its malice. I tried to soothe it, to unravel it with understanding, to show it there was another way besides despair. I don't know how long I knelt there. Sweat dripped from my brow, my whole body shook with the strain. The violet light of the shard flickered, fought, and then with a soundless shriek that echoed only in the soul, it shattered. Not physically, the obsidian remained, but the malevolent energy within it evaporated, dispersed by the wave of pure, healing empathy I had forced into it. I collapsed forward, catching myself on my hands, gasping. The oppressive weight was gone, the whispers were silent. The tower was just a cold, ruined stone building. I heard running footsteps. Raven burst in, his axe drawn, his face etched with worry. He saw me on the floor, panting, and then his eyes swept the room. He felt the difference. The air was clean. By the moon, he breathed. He walked over, crouching, and put a hand on my shoulder. It was a firm, steadying grip. "What did you do, boy?" I looked up at him, exhaustion making me dizzy. I gave it a better story to believe. He helped me to my feet. As we walked out of the tower, the gray sky seemed a little brighter. The psychic poison was broken at its source. The healing of the outpost would take time, but now it was possible. And as we rode back to Blackstone, a new thought crystallized in my weary mind. This was an attack, a deliberate magical assault on our pack's will. Someone had declared a hidden war. And I, the overlooked Omega, was the one who had discovered it. The Alpha King hadn't just sent me away for my safety. He had somehow sent me to the front lines. The return to Blackstone Outpost felt like entering a different world. The heavy, despairing silence was not gone, but it was fractured. It was like the first breath of wind after a long stagnation. The warriors we passed still moved slowly, but some lifted their heads as we rode through the gates. Their eyes tracked me, not with suspicion now, but with a fragile, dawning hope. Word of what had happened at the tower spread in whispers. I hadn't said a thing, but Raven had a look in his eye that spoke volumes, and soldiers talk. I was taken back to my hut and ordered, in no uncertain terms, to rest. I didn't argue. The psychic battle had hollowed me out. Even with the moonstone's aid, I felt as if I'd run for days without sleep. I lay on the cot, the cool pendant resting on my sternum, and let the deep quiet of true exhaustion claim me. When I awoke, it was dark outside. A soft, golden light spilled from a single lamp on the small table. Beside it sat a bowl of stew, still warm, and a hunk of fresh bread. A luxury here. I ate slowly, the simple food tasting more nourishing than any feast I'd known at the pack house. As I finished, the door opened quietly. Raven stepped in, filling the small space. He carried himself differently, the grim tension had eased from his shoulders. "You slept a full day," he said, his voice a low rumble. "How do you feel?" "Empty," I admitted, "but clean." He nodded, pulling up the stool. "The outpost is waking up, it's slow. Like men shaking off a deep sleep, but the fog is lifting." Kaelen held a drills assessment this afternoon. No one passed, but they all showed up. A week ago they wouldn't have. A warmth that had nothing to do with the stew spread through my chest. "That's good." "It's a start," he corrected, but there was no harshness in it. "The shard, you said it was an attack, crafted." "Yes, the runes were like nothing I've seen. It wasn't a natural phenomenon. It was a weapon designed to erode will, to create apathy. To make a garrison defenseless without a single sword being drawn." Raven's scarred face hardened. "The Skullville pack to the south across the pass, they've always coveted this territory. Their Alpha Vargas is a brute, but he's cunning. This subtle poison reeks of a different kind of cunning. He must have a new ally, a witch or a psychic like you, but turned to malice." The thought chilled me. An Omega or someone with similar gifts, using them not to heal but to cripple. It felt like a perversion of everything I was. "What do we do?" I asked. "We secure the outpost, we rebuild its spirit, and we send word to the king." He fixed me with a steady look. "Your part in this isn't over, Kaelen. You broke the source, but the poison was in their veins for weeks. They need more than time, they need healing, the kind you can give." The task felt monumental. "I can try, but it's one thing to fight a single, focused source. It's another to mend dozens of battered spirits one by one." You won't be alone, Raven said, surprising me. I've spoken to the men, they're wary but they're willing. Start with Kaelen, when the others see it working. He didn't need to finish. Hope was a seed that needed careful tending. The next morning I began. Kaelen came to me first, as before. This time I didn't just diagnose. I let my calm, focused empathy flow into him, not to battle a foreign poison, but to gently soothe the wounds it had left behind, the ingrained whispers of worthlessness, the deep cracks in his confidence. It was like applying a poultice to a soul. I couldn't erase the memory of the pain, but I could help scar it over with strength. It took hours. When we finished, Kaelen looked exhausted, but his silver eyes were clear for the first time. He took a deep, shuddering breath, as if breathing freely after being suffocated. He didn't thank me with words. He simply placed his fist over his heart in a soldier's salute, a gesture of profound respect, and walked out with his spine a little straighter. One by one, they came. Warriors, tough men who had faced physical agony without a whimper, sat before me and confessed to the terror of the voices in their own heads. I listened. I didn't judge. I offered the quiet, the calm, the steady light of the moonstone and my own spirit. It was grueling work. Each session left me drained, but unlike the battle with the shard, this drain was followed by a profound sense of fulfillment. I was using my curse as the pack saw it and turning it into a genuine gift. I was not just a tool. I was a healer. After a week, the change in Blackstone was undeniable. The drills were louder, the fires burned brighter, laughter tentative and rough, sometimes echoed off the walls. The outpost was healing. Raven approached me one evening as I stood on the wall, looking out over the Serpent's Pass. A rider came today from the pack house. My breath caught. The king. He received my first report about the shard, about your role in breaking it. Raven leaned on the parapet beside me. His orders are clear. You are to continue your work here until the outpost is fully restored to operational readiness. Then, you are to return to the pack house with my unit. He wants you back. The words "he wants you back" sent a confusing jolt through me. Part dread, part something else I couldn't name. What of the Skullville threat? He's mobilizing the border legions. Quietly. He doesn't want open war, not until we know the full extent of their new arsenal. Your discovery may have prevented one. Raven looked at me, his expression inscrutable in the twilight. You saved this outpost, Kaelen. More than that, you gave these men their souls back. They won't forget it. I won't forget it. His gratitude was a solid, tangible thing. It meant more than any praise from the court. I was just doing my duty, I said softly. No, Raven corrected, his voice firm. You went far beyond duty. You fought a ghost and won. Remember that when you go back to that den of politics and pretty knives. You are not the Omega they left behind. As I looked out at the darkening pass, I knew he was right. The Kaelen who had shivered in the Alpha King's study was gone. In his place was someone who had stood on a lonely frontier and turned the tide of a hidden war. I had taken a step forward, and this time the warriors at my back hadn't stepped away. They had begun to stand beside me. But the peace I felt was fragile. The enemy knew their weapon was destroyed. What would they try next? And when I returned to the pack house, the political wolves like Beta Jackson would be waiting. My victory here had made me stronger, but it had also made me a much more interesting target. The journey back to the pack house 3 weeks later was a different experience. I rode not as cargo, but as part of the unit. The warriors, once silent, now included me in their terse conversations. They shared water skins, pointed out landmarks. Kaelen, riding beside me, talked of his family in a southern village, his voice no longer hollow with despair but warm with longing. I was still an Omega. The hierarchy hadn't vanished. But a new, unspoken respect had been forged in the crucible of Blackstone. It was a respect earned, not given by birthright, and it felt more real than anything I'd ever known. As the familiar peaks of the Central Territory came into view, my anxiety began to coil tightly in my gut. The moonstone pendant was a comforting weight, but it couldn't shield me from the memories of scornful looks and whispered taunts. Would my success here matter within those polished stone walls, or would I simply be the upstart Omega who had been briefly useful? We passed through the main gates at midday. The pack house buzzed with its usual activity, but I felt the shift immediately. Eyes turned, conversations paused. News traveled fast. The Omega who had been sent away in semi-disgrace was returning with a military escort, and not just any escort, Captain Raven's hardened border unit. We dismounted in the main courtyard. Stable hands rushed forward, but their eyes flicked to me with open curiosity. I kept my gaze forward, my back straight, embodying the calm I had learned at the outpost. Kaelen, I turned. Beta Lyra stood there, her expression as impeccably controlled as ever, but her flinty eyes held a new, sharp assessment. His Majesty will see you in his study. Now. Captain Raven, you are to attend as well. Raven grunted in acknowledgement. We followed her through the familiar corridors, the opulence now feeling garish and stifling compared to the stark honesty of Blackstone. The door to the study opened. Alpha King Alistair was at his desk, but he was not alone. Beta Jackson stood before it, along with two other high-ranking betas I recognized as his allies. The air in the room was tense, thick with unspoken conflict. Jackson's eyes locked onto me the moment I entered, burning with a venomous mix of contempt and fury. My intervention at the moon gaze had clearly not been forgiven. Alistair looked up. His winter sky eyes swept over Raven and then settled on me. He looked older. The lines of pressure around his mouth were deeper, but his gaze was as penetrating as ever. Captain, report. Raven stepped forward, his voice formal and clipped. He detailed the situation at Blackstone, the psychic malaise, the discovery of the crafted shard, its effect, and the process of healing. He gave credit where it was due, stating plainly, the weapon was identified and neutralized by Kaelen. His subsequent efforts were instrumental in restoring the morale and operational capacity of the outpost. Without him, we would have lost the garrison not to steel, but to shadows. A thick silence followed. Jackson's jaw tightened. The Skullville pack, Alistair stated, his voice cold. High probability, my king, Raven confirmed. The method suggests an outside specialist, a psychic manipulator in their employ. Alistair's gaze shifted to me. You touched this shard's energy, describe it. I stepped forward, keeping my voice level despite Jackson's glare. It was a projection of pure despair and self-doubt, my king. It felt ancient and hateful, but the construct was new. It didn't just cause sadness, it actively sought out and amplified each individual's deepest insecurities, twisting them until they believed nothing else. An insidious weapon, one of the other betas murmured, looking uneasy. An Omega's weapon, Jackson sneered, finding his voice, fighting feelings with feelings. It is a coward's tactic. Our response should be steel and fire, not empathy. Alistair's eyes never left me. And how did you defeat it, Kaelen? I met his gaze, drawing strength from the memory. I didn't fight its hatred with more hatred, that would have fed it. I countered it with conviction, with the certainty that its lies were not true, that the pack is worth fighting for, that these warriors had value. I gave it a truth stronger than its fiction. For a long moment, Alistair just looked at me. The room held its breath. An ingenious defense, he said finally, and his words fell like a gavel. You used the enemy's chosen battlefield but changed the terms of engagement. Captain Raven, you and your men have earned your rest. You are dismissed. Kaelen, remain. Raven shot me a brief, reassuring glance before bowing and leaving with the others. Jackson looked furious at being excluded, but a flick of Alistair's finger dismissed him and his allies. They filed out, Jackson casting a last, promising glare my way. The door clicked shut. We were alone. Alistair leaned back in his chair, the mask of the impassive king softening into something more like the weary man I'd glimpsed before. You look stronger, he observed. Blackstone was clarifying, my king. I have no doubt. He steepled his fingers. Jackson is not wrong in one sense. This is a new kind of war, and you have proven to be our most effective weapon against it. That puts you in even greater danger. I understand, do you? He stood, walking to the window. You return a hero to the border guards. But to the court you return an anomaly, a low-born Omega who has earned the king's attention and the warrior's respect. You have made powerful enemies today just by standing there and telling the truth. I didn't seek this, I said, a flicker of my old defiance surfacing. I know, he turned and his expression was stark. That is the only reason I trust you. You did not seek power. You answered a call to duty, and you discovered a power within yourself that this pack desperately needs. He walked back to his desk, picking up a sealed scroll. The Skullville threat is not over. They will try again, perhaps differently. I am creating a new advisory position, Royal Empath and Liaison to the Border Legions. You will hold it. You will have authority to investigate psychic threats, to train others with latent empathic gifts, and to advise me directly. The world tilted. My king, I am an Omega. The laws, the traditions are killing us, he said, his voice low and fierce. We face an enemy that scorns our physical strength and attacks our minds. I need a mind that understands that battlefield. I have watched you, Kaelen, from the courtyard to the moon gaze to the report from Blackstone. You have a strength that has nothing to do with rank. It is a strength of spirit, and I would be a fool not to use it. He held out the scroll. It was an official decree. This will cause an uproar. Jackson's faction will scream. Others will be skeptical. You will need every ounce of that strength. I took the scroll. The parchment felt heavy with potential and peril. Why are you doing this? You could have just kept using me quietly. Because, he said, his gaze boring into mine, after seeing what you did at Blackstone, keeping you quiet would not just be a waste. It would be a crime against my own pack. You took a step forward, Kaelen. It is time for the pack to stop stepping back. It is time for it to follow. He was offering me not just a title, but a revolution. And as I stood there, the scroll in my hand, the moonstone warm against my chest, I realized the frightened Omega in the snow was truly gone. In his place stood a healer, a soldier, and now an advisor. The path ahead was shrouded in shadow and threat. But for the first time, I was not walking it alone in the dark. The Alpha King himself was lighting the way, and that was the most terrifying, exhilarating feeling of all. The uproar was instantaneous. The decree was posted at dawn. By midday, the pack house was a hive of outraged whispers and heated arguments. I was summoned to my first official council meeting that afternoon. I wore the simple, dark clothes of a royal attendant, the only mark of my new station, the moonstone pendant, now worn openly over my tunic. It drew every eye as I entered the council chamber, a high-ceilinged room with a long table of polished black wood. Windows lined one wall, casting sharp bars of light across the faces of the assembled alphas and senior betas. All conversation ceased as I walked to the foot of the table. There was no seat for me, a calculated slight. Alpha King Alistair sat at the head, an implacable mountain. To his right, Beta Jackson smoldered. To his left, an older, calmer alpha named Thuron watched with thoughtful eyes. "Let the council come to order," Alistair said, his voice silencing the last rustle. "We have a new threat to discuss, the Skullville's psychic warfare, and we have a new resource. Kaelen, Royal Empath, will provide his assessment." Jackson didn't wait. "This is farcical. We are to take military counsel from an Omega. His place is in the healing wards, not the war room. This resource is a distraction from the real issue. Skullville has crossed a line. We must muster the armies and burn their dens to the ground." Murmurs of agreement rippled through his faction. Alistair remained silent, his eyes on me. This was my first test, not of my empathy, but of my nerve. I took a breath, letting the moonstone's calm settle my racing heart. "Beta Jackson is correct that they have crossed a line," I began, my voice clear in the silent room. Every head swiveled to me, shocked I had spoken. "But a conventional attack is precisely what they want." Jackson scoffed. "Nonsense, is it?" I met his glare, drawing on the certainty I'd found at Blackstone. Consider, they spent weeks, perhaps months, crafting a magical weapon to disable a key outpost. Not to kill, but to demoralize. Why? Because a demoralized border is a leaky border. It draws resources to reinforce it. It preoccupies our leadership. It makes us reactive, angry, and predictable. I looked around the table. If we march our legions south in open anger, we leave other borders weakened. We fight on their chosen terrain, draining our strength. They have shown us their first move. It was subtle. Our response should be measured, not merely muscular. Thuron, the older alpha, stroked his beard. You suggest they are baiting us. I suggest they are thinking differently, I said. They are attacking our will, our unity. The shard at Blackstone didn't just target warriors, it targeted the idea of Shadowfen itself, the belief that we are strong, that our cause is just. The greatest damage it did was to make our own men doubt their alpha and their pack. A heavy silence fell. I had voiced their deepest fear, not of an enemy's sword, but of their own people's lost faith. How do you propose we fight this empath? Jackson spat the title. By strengthening what they attack, I said, turning to Alistair. My king, we must be seen. Not just by the enemy, but by our own pack. The outposts, the remote villages, they need to feel the strength of the center, not as a distant ruler, but as a present protector. Send trusted captains, yes. But also, let them see their alpha believes in them enough to send a new kind of defender. Let me and those I can train visit the borders. We can be early warning systems. We can fortify spirits against such attacks. We can show that Shadowfen's strength is not just in its claws, but in the unbreakable spirit of every member from Alpha to Omega. The proposal was radical. It turned the pack's inward-looking hierarchy inside out. Alistair's lips thinned, but I saw a spark in his eyes, approval. A strategy of unity over division, of fortifying the heart as well as the wall. He looked at Jackson. Your approach is not invalid, Beta. The legions will be readied, but they will not march blindly. We will answer their subtlety with wisdom and their malice with resolve. Kaelen's plan will be implemented. He will have the resources to identify and train others with empathic gifts. He will report directly to me. The decree was reinforced. I had survived the first council. More than survived, I had planted a seed. As the meeting adjourned, Jackson brushed past me, his voice a low growl only I could hear. A pretty speech, Omega, but speeches don't stop daggers. Watch your back. I didn't flinch. Thank you for the counsel, Beta Jackson. I am watching everything. He stormed out. Thuron approached me, his gaze appraising. You have a keen mind for strategy, young one. It is unexpected. The king sees something in you. Do not make him regret his faith. I don't intend to, Alpha Thuron. He nodded and left. I was alone in the vast chamber, the bars of light stretching long across the floor. I had taken another step, this time onto the most treacherous ground of all, pack politics. I had allies in the king and in warriors like Raven. I had enemies in Jackson and his ilk, and I had a purpose now, one that stretched beyond survival. I was to be the weaver of the pack's spirit, the mender of its hidden cracks. The enemy sought to unravel us from within. I would see to it that every thread was bound tight, strong enough to withstand any shadow. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. I was given a modest but private chamber near the royal quarters, a clear sign of the king's favor that raised more eyebrows than it quelled. My time was split between the archives, searching for any lore on psychic warfare or empathic lineages, and the training grounds, though not for combat. My first student found me rather than the other way around. Her name was Myra, a Delta from the kitchens, Liana's friend. She was young with anxious eyes, and she clutched a broken pitcher in her hands. Please, sir, I mean empath Kaelen, she stammered, bowing her head. They said you understand the feelings. I keep feeling things. When people are angry near the ovens, the fires spike. When someone is sad, the bread won't rise. They think I'm cursed or clumsy. I saw it in her aura, a flickering, untamed sensitivity to the emotional energy around her, manifesting in small, uncontrolled ways. She was a raw, unformed empath. "You're not cursed, Myra," I said gently. "You have a gift, one that can be taught. Would you like to learn?" Her grateful nod was the start. Others came, trickling in quietly. A gardener whose plants thrived or wilted with his moods. A scout who could sense predatory intent before he saw the beast. They were all low-ranked, overlooked, their gifts dismissed as quirks or failings. I gathered them in a sunlit, disused conservatory, far from prying eyes. We didn't practice dominance or projection. We practiced stillness, listening, shielding, how to differentiate between another's emotion and your own. How to use the moonstone's focus. I had simpler versions crafted for them, milky quartz set in iron. We were building a network of quiet sentinels, a nervous system for the pack's emotional well-being. One afternoon, as I guided Myra through a grounding exercise, a shadow fell across the sunlit floor. Captain Raven stood in the doorway, his arms crossed. "Training an army of feelers," he grunted, but there was no malice in it. "A network of listeners, Captain," I corrected. "Eyes see threats, ears hear plots, these ones they feel shifts in the dark." The kind of shift that happened at Blackstone before anyone knew they were sick. He considered this, then nodded slowly. "Smart, the king wants you. We've had reports from the eastern timberlands, not sickness, something else, vanishing." I dismissed my students and followed Raven to the study. Alistair was with Thuron, a map of the eastern territories spread before them. "4 hunters," Alistair said without preamble, "gone in the last 10 days, no signs of struggle, no scent trails, they simply walked into the deepwood and did not return. The local Alpha is spooked." He speaks of a quiet that listens. A chill that had nothing to do with the room crept down my spine. A quiet that listens, that sounds like a void, something that absorbs presence or attention. "Can your students sense such a thing?" Thuron asked. "Perhaps. But I should go myself. This is too similar to the Blackstone attack to ignore, a different flavor of the same poison." Alistair's gaze was sharp. "It could be a trap. Jackson is not the only one unhappy with your rise. An accident in the Deepwood would be convenient." "I'll take Raven and a small unit," I said, "and I'll take Myra. Her gift is attuned to environmental emotional residue. If there is a listening quiet, she may hear its echo." Alistair held my gaze for a long moment, a silent argument passing between us. He feared for my safety, I feared for the hunters and for what this new pattern meant. Reluctance, then resolve, hardened his features. "Go, but you are to report daily via Falcon. Raven, his safety is your priority." "Yes, my king." The journey east was swift. The Deepwood lived up to its name, ancient, dense pines that blocked out the sky, their floors a carpet of silent needles. The village at its edge was tense, the people speaking in hushed tones. We found the last place the most recent hunter had been seen, a clearing by a creek. I closed my eyes, extending my senses. The forest was alive with the gentle hum of insect life, the patient thoughts of trees, the skittering fears of small creatures. But there was a hole, a patch of emptiness near the water's edge. It wasn't natural. It felt like a scar, a place where feeling had been scooped out. "Myra," I whispered, "here, what do you feel?" The young Delta stepped forward, her hands trembling. She focused, her brow furrowed. "It's hungry," she breathed, her face pale. It wanted his attention, his awareness. And when he gave it, it took him. It didn't hurt him, it just made him forget to come back. A psychic trap, not one of despair, but of absorption. Something was feeding on the conscious awareness of our people. "Can you track it?" Raven asked, his hand on his axe. I looked at the emptiness, following its faint, cold trail with my mind. It led deeper into the wood, toward a place the villagers called the Whispering Crags. "We can," I said, "but we must be careful. Our attention is what it wants. We must look at it from the corner of our eye, so to speak. Myra, I need you to focus on the feeling of the trees, the rocks, the water. Focus on everything around the emptiness. That will guide us." It was a strange, indirect hunt. We moved not toward the cold spot, but parallel to it, using Myra's sense of the healthy forest to navigate the void's edges. It led us to a narrow gorge, its walls slick with moss. At its center, half submerged in a stagnant pool, was another rune-carved stone. This one was a pale, bone-like substance, humming with a soundless, sucking silence. This weapon wasn't about breaking will, it was about erasing presence. Making people vanish into apathy, becoming lost souls who simply wandered away from their lives. We need to contain it, not shatter it, I said, thinking aloud. Shattering it might release whatever consciousness it has absorbed. How? Raven asked. By filling the emptiness with something it cannot consume. I turned to Myra and the two warriors with us. Think of your strongest, most vivid memory, a moment of pure joy or love or determination. Hold it in your mind, bright and clear. I did the same. I thought of Alara's steadfast face, of Caden's clear-eyed salute, of the king's voice saying, "You have a strength of spirit." I gathered these moments, these unbreakable truths of connection, and wove them into a brilliant, dense knot in my mind. Then, together, as I directed, we projected not at the stone, but into the void around it. We poured our focused memories, our attention fueled by meaning, into the hollow. The bone stone reacted violently. It couldn't consume this. This wasn't loose, wandering awareness. It was anchored, purposeful memory. The void shuddered, recoiled. With a sharp crack, the stone split down the middle. The sucking silence vanished, replaced by the normal sounds of the forest, the wind, the water, our own breathing. And from the gorge, blinking and confused, stumbled the four missing hunters. They were thin, dehydrated, but unharmed. They had no memory of the past days, only a vague feeling of being lost in a dream. We had recovered them. We had neutralized a second weapon. But as we led the dazed hunters back to the village, a grim certainty settled in my bones. This was not two isolated attacks. This was a campaign. The Skullville pack, or whatever power behind them, was testing different weapons on different parts of our territory, probing our weaknesses. Blackstone was despair. The Deepwood was oblivion. What would the next test be, and where would it strike? The storm wasn't coming. It was already here, and it was raining shadows. The successful recovery of the hunters was a victory, but it tasted like ashes. We returned to the pack house as saviors to the common folk, but in the council it only deepened the fractures. Jackson was apoplectic. 2 attacks, 2 different magical assaults on our land, and we respond with feelings and memories. This is an act of war. Every day we delay a counterstrike, we look weak. The counterstrike is being prepared, Jackson. Alistair's voice cut through the chamber, colder than I'd ever heard it. But blundering into the Skullville territory without understanding the full nature of this psychic arsenal would be suicide. Kaelen's methods have saved lives and preserved our strength. That is not weakness. That is intelligence. Intelligence? Jackson sneered, turning his fury on me. He is an Omega playing at strategy. These attacks could be coincidences, natural phenomena his hysterical mind has concocted into a grand conspiracy to elevate his own status. A few murmurs of agreement rose. The doubt was like a toxin in the room. My students, my findings, were being painted as the fantasies of an upstart. Thuron, usually a voice of calm, spoke gravely. The recovered hunters are not a fantasy, Jackson. The changed outpost is not a fantasy. But the beta has a point about perception. The pack whispers. They hear of Omega councils and empathic training, and they do not understand. They see a break with tradition, and it frightens them. Fear is a vulnerability our enemy can exploit. He was right. I had been so focused on the external enemy, I had underestimated the enemy within, fear of change. Then we show them, I said, stepping forward. All eyes turned to me. We don't just tell them, we show them the strength in this new way, a public gathering. Not in the great hall for the high ranks, but in the training grounds for all. Let the people see what we are building. Let them see an empath calm a panicked horse or locate a lost child by their emotional signature. Let them see that this gift protects them. Jackson laughed, a harsh barking sound. A carnival sideshow? No, Alistair said, his voice resonant with finality. It is a demonstration of unity. Of the pack's many strengths working as one, it will be done in 3 days' time. The decision was made. The next 72 hours were a frenzy of preparation. I drilled my small group of students not in complex techniques but in simple, visible demonstrations of their utility. Myra practiced with a skittish young colt. The gardener, Oren, worked with blighted plants. The morning of the gathering dawned clear and cold. The main training field was packed with a crowd rarely seen: warriors, deltas, gammas, omegas, families from the nearby village. The air buzzed with curiosity and skepticism. Alistair stood on a raised platform, a regal, imposing figure. I stood to his side, my students behind me. Jackson and his faction were prominently seated, their expressions stony. "My people," Alistair began, his voice carrying effortlessly, "we face a new kind of threat, one that slinks in the shadows of the mind. To fight it, we must embrace all our gifts. Today you see a new arm of your pack's defense." The demonstrations began. Myra approached the agitated colt. She didn't force calm on it, she gently matched its frantic energy, then slowly, like a settling mist, soothed it until the animal nuzzled her hand. The crowd murmured in surprise. Oren touched a withering, frost-blighted sapling. He poured his focus, his vision of its healthy potential, into it. We all watched, breath held, as the grayish leaves slowly regained a tinge of green. It was a minor miracle, visible and real. Then it was my turn. A volunteer was asked for, a warrior to have his fears momentarily amplified so I could then soothe them. To my horror, Beta Jackson stood. "I will volunteer," he announced, a challenge in his eyes. "Let us see the famed empath's power firsthand." This was a trap. If I failed, I was a fraud. If I succeeded, he would claim I manipulated him, but I had no choice. He strode to the center. I approached him. "Beta Jackson," I said quietly, "this is not a contest." "Everything is a contest, Omega," he whispered back, his smile cruel. I placed my hands on either side of his head, not touching him. I reached out with my empathy. His mind was a fortress of pride, ambition, and a deep, seething resentment. I found the edge of a fear, not of battle, but of irrelevance, of being overshadowed. As agreed, I gently amplified it, just enough for his breath to hitch, for a flicker of unease to show in his eyes. Then I began to soothe. I sent waves of calm, of certainty, not my own, but reflections of his own proven courage, his long service. I reminded his own spirit of its strength. His aggressive stance softened. The defiant glare in his eyes faded, replaced by a moment of startled, genuine peace. He took a deep, easy breath. I stepped back. The crowd was utterly silent. Jackson blinked, returning to himself. He looked at me, and for a second I saw not hatred, but a baffled, unwilling awe. Then the mask slammed back down. He forced a laugh. "A clever trick, a momentary dizziness. You see, it is a parlor trick, nothing more," but the crowd had seen. They had seen the change in him, however brief. They had seen the colt calm, the sapling heal. The applause started slowly from the common folk at the back, then grew, rolling across the field. It wasn't thunderous, but it was real. It was acceptance. On the platform, Alistair allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. The demonstration was a success, but as Jackson stalked away, shooting me a look of pure, undiluted hatred, I knew the victory was fragile. I had humiliated him publicly. I had proven my worth to the pack, but in doing so, I had made an enemy who would now stop at nothing. The fracture in the pack wasn't just about tradition versus progress. It was now personal. And a personal enemy with Jackson's power and pride was more dangerous than any psychic shard. The storm outside was bad enough. Now the lightning was striking within our own walls. The public demonstration changed everything and nothing. Among the common folk, I became a figure of curious respect, the Omega who could speak to the spirit of things. My students walked a little taller. but within the marble halls of power the air grew thicker, colder. Jackson's faction stopped their open protests and settled into a silent, watchful hostility. They were waiting for a misstep. A moon cycle passed with no new psychic attacks from Skullvale. The silence was unnerving. It felt like the held breath before a scream. I used the time to expand the empathic network, establishing a rudimentary relay system using my trained students in key outposts and villages. They couldn't send complex messages, but they could send a pulse of alarm, a feeling of wrongness back toward the pack house. It was a nervous system, finally connected. It was Myra, stationed now at the vital Riverwatch crossing, a trade hub and freshwater source, who sent the first true alarm. The feeling that came down the link to me, seated in my chamber, was not the hollow despair of Blackstone or the sucking silence of the Deepwood. It was a sharp, virulent hatred, a red, boiling rage that felt infectious. I bolted from my seat, the moonstone burning cold against my skin. I found Alistair in the strategy room with Thuron and Raven. Riverwatch, I gasped, not bothering with formality. It's under attack, not by soldiers. By a fever of rage, Myra is terrified. Alistair's face went grim. A third weapon, Raven, mobilized the rapid response unit. Horses now, Kaelen, you're with us. We rode through the night, a unit of 20 on swift horses. The Riverwatch settlement was normally a bustling, peaceful place. As we neared it at dawn, we could hear the sounds, not of battle, but of a brawl. Shouts, curses, the crash of breaking wood. We charged into the central square. The scene was chaos. Farmers, traders, and soldiers were brawling mindlessly. Friends pummeled each other. A woman screamed as she tried to pull two men apart, her eyes wide with the same contagious fury. It was as if a switch had been flipped in every mind, releasing pure, unthinking aggression. In the middle of it, backed against the well, was Myra. She had her hands raised, a bubble of desperate calm extending a few feet around her, holding back 3 snarling men. Her nose was bleeding from the strain, her quartz pendant glowing faintly. Raven, contain them, non-lethal force. Alistair roared, his alpha command slicing through the noise. It had a slight effect, a few fighters hesitated, but the red rage was too strong, overriding even his dominance. I dismounted, pushing through the chaos toward Myra. The anger was a physical force, a hot wind trying to ignite my own temper. I clung to the moonstone's cool core, focusing on Myra's pinpoint of calm. Kaelen, she cried, her voice breaking. I'm here, hold on. I reached her side and placed my hands on her shoulders, amplifying her power. Our combined calm pushed the bubble outward, forcing the enraged men back a step, but it was like trying to hold back a flood with a teacup. The source of this was nearby, pumping this poison into the very air. Where is it coming from? I shouted over the din. The well, Myra sobbed, the feeling it's pouring from the water. Of course, the water source, the heart of the settlement, the enemy was learning, becoming more insidious. They weren't just targeting individuals or places, they were targeting community itself, turning the bonds of pack against each other. Alistair and Raven's men were wrestling fighters to the ground, binding them with ropes, but more kept surging forward, driven by mindless hate. I have to go to the well. I told Myra, keep this bubble just for a little longer. She nodded, gritting her teeth, tears cutting through the blood on her face. I plunged into the crowd, using empathy not to calm, but to deflect, slipping through gaps in their emotional awareness like a ghost. The well was in the center of the square, its stone rim carved with peaceful river motifs, now a stark contrast to the violence around it. I didn't need my gift to sense the wrongness here. The water within shimmered with a faint, sickly crimson hue. Leaning over the edge, I saw it, a porous red stone like a corrupted heart pulsing at the bottom, diffusing its venom into the water supply. This was the strongest weapon yet. It didn't just affect those who came near, it infected the entire community through the water they drank. A psychic poison for the masses. To break this, I couldn't just soothe the stone, I had to cleanse the well itself and every person who had drunk from it. The scale was impossible. Alistair fought his way to my side, his knuckles bleeding. Can you stop it? The source is in the water, but the poison is in them, I said, my mind racing. I need to counter it not with calm, but with its opposite, not just for one person, but for everyone at once. How? I looked at him, at the unwavering strength in his eyes despite the madness around us. You are the heart of the pack, my king. Their bond is to you. I need to use that. I need to amplify your bond, your call to unity, and push it into the water, into the air. I need you to give them something stronger to feel than this hate. Understanding dawned in his gaze. It was a profound risk. It would mean him opening his spirit to my empathy, letting me weave his essence into a psychic counterattack. For an alpha, it was an act of supreme vulnerability. Do it, he said without hesitation. I placed one hand on his shoulder over the symbol of his rank. With the other, I reached out over the well. I closed my eyes, diving deep. First, I touched the core of Alistair, past the king, past the warrior, to the man who carried the weight of every soul in Shadowfen. I found not just strength, but a deep, abiding love for his people, a love that was his secret burden and his greatest power. I drew it out, a brilliant silver-gold thread of pure, protective connection. Then I touched the poisoned water, the hateful red stone. I took Alistair's bond, the feeling of belonging, of being part of something greater than oneself, and I did not attack the hate. I offered it an alternative. I poured that silver-gold connection into the well, using the water as a conduit. You are not alone. You are not enemies. You are pack, you are Shadowfen. Remember the shoulder beside yours. Remember the shared fire. Remember your alpha who fights for you. I pushed the feeling outward, not as a command, but as an invitation, amplified by my gift and focused by the moonstone. It rippled through the tainted water, purified it from the source, and then spread into the very moisture in the air, into the breath of every fighting person in the square. The change was not instantaneous. The brawls continued for a few more seconds. Then one by one the fighters staggered back. The red haze left their eyes, replaced by confusion, then by dawning horror as they saw the bruises on their friends, the broken stalls, their own bloody hands. A man dropped the chair leg he was holding, sinking to his knees with a sob. Others embraced, murmuring apologies, their faces etched with shame. The contagious rage was broken, washed away by a tidal wave of restored belonging. The silence that fell was broken only by soft weeping and the heavy breath of the exhausted. Alistair swayed slightly, and I removed my hand, the connection severing. He looked at me, his pale eyes wide with the echo of what had just passed between us. He had been laid bare, and I had seen the true core of the Alpha King. Not just power, but profound, painful love. We need to retrieve that stone, I said, my voice hoarse, and check every other water source. Raven, breathing heavily, nodded and began organizing his men. As Alistair moved to address his shocked and ashamed people, I stayed by the well, trembling. This attack was an escalation, despair, oblivion, and now fracturing rage. The enemy was systematically attacking the pillars of a pack, morale, presence, and unity. They were studying us, and they were getting better. I looked at my own hands, the hands that had just channeled a king's heart to save his people. The power was heady, terrifying. And as I caught Beta Jackson's gaze from across the square, he had arrived with a secondary force, too late to help. I saw a new emotion in his eyes. It wasn't just hatred anymore. It was fear, and a fearful enemy inside the gates was the most dangerous kind of all. The aftermath at Riverwatch was a somber affair of healing wounds, both physical and emotional. The red stone retrieved from the well was a vicious little thing, its runes more complex, more aggressive. It was clear now, this was a coordinated campaign by a skilled and ruthless psychic artisan. Alistair doubled the guards on all water sources. My network was on high alert, but the next attack didn't come from outside. 3 nights after our return, I was working late in the archives, cross-referencing the runes from the 3 stones. They shared a common, angular style, a signature. I was close to a breakthrough, a hunch about their origin tracing back to an obscure, extinct lineage of mind smiths. The door to the archives creaked open. I expected a servant or perhaps Myra, but the scent that reached me was one of expensive oil and simmering resentment. Beta Jackson stood in the doorway, alone. The flickering lamplight carved deep shadows in his face. Working late empath, planning our next defense against phantoms, I kept my voice neutral, my hand subtly moving closer to a heavy book. The threats are real, Beta Jackson. The people of Riverwatch would attest to that. The people of Riverwatch were overcome by mass hysteria, easily explained by tainted grain or swamp fumes, he said, stepping inside, letting the door swing shut behind him. A story you and the king have embellished for your own ends. Why are you here, Jackson? I asked, abandoning pretense. To give you a chance, he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. You are being used, boy. Alistair is weak. He clings to old ways while embracing these aberrations. He cannot see that true strength lies in purity in the natural order. Alpha, beta, gamma, delta, omega, he spat the last word. You have a gift, I admit it, but it could be put to better use. To cleanse the pack, not coddle it. A cold dread seeped into my bones. What are you suggesting? An alliance. There are those of us who see the future, a stronger Shadowfen, one where the weak do not dictate strategy. Join us, use your gifts to identify dissent, to root out weakness from within. In the new order you would have an honored place, far above this scholarly squalor. He gestured dismissively at the scrolls. He was asking me to become an inquisitor, to use empathy as a weapon of terror and purge. You're talking about treason, I said quietly. I'm talking about salvation, he hissed, leaning forward. The Skullville threat is a distraction. The real sickness is here, in our tolerance in this erosion of tradition. Alistair must be made to see reason, or he must be persuaded to step aside. So that was it. This wasn't just dislike, this was a coup in the making. Jackson and his faction weren't just skeptical, they were actively plotting against the king, using the external crisis as cover. I will never betray my Alpha King, I said, my voice ringing clear in the quiet archive. His face contorted with fury. Then you are a fool and you will share his fate. He straightened up. Consider this your only warning. The tide is turning. When it breaks, you will drown with him. He turned and left, leaving the scent of his threat hanging in the air. I sat frozen for a full minute, my heart hammering. Then I moved. I gathered my notes, hid the most sensitive ones, and extinguished the lamp. I had to warn Alistair. But as I hurried through the darkened corridors toward the royal wing, a new, more terrifying thought occurred to me. Jackson had revealed his hand too easily. Was it arrogance, or was it because he believed it was already too late for me to stop him? My empathic senses, always extended slightly for protection, brushed against the auras of the guards stationed outside the king's study. Their usual disciplined focus was replaced by a thin veneer of calm over a core of anticipation, wrong anticipation. I stopped short, melting into a deep alcove. These were not Alistair's men, they were Jackson's. The coup wasn't in the future, it was now. I couldn't go through the front. I thought of the layout of the pack house, of the old servant passages Alara had told me about. There was one, she'd said, a forgotten conduit for laundry steam that ran behind the study's hearth. I moved like a shadow, slipping into the lower kitchens and finding the small, rusted metal door behind a stack of sacks. It opened with a groan of protest. The passage was narrow, claustrophobic, and hot, filled with the ghosts of old soap and damp stone. I inched forward, guided by memory and desperation. I could hear voices as I neared the end, filtering through the old brickwork of the hearth. Your sentimentality has made us vulnerable, Alistair. Jackson's voice, smooth now with triumph. The only vulnerability I see is your lack of loyalty, Jackson. The king's voice was cold steel. You would break the pack to rule its pieces. The pack is already broken by you. You have let an Omega whisper strategies in your ear. You have let our warriors practice meditation. We are a laughingstock. Tonight, the High Council agrees. You will sign a decree stepping down due to failing health, and I will lead us back to strength. You think the High Council follows you? Raven. Thuron is considering. Raven is at the border conveniently. The rest see the inevitable. The empathic network, your little pet's project, has been compromised. My people are in place. There will be no alarm raised. My blood ran cold. My network, Myra, Orin, the others, had they been harmed? And Kaelen, Alistair's voice was dangerously quiet. A tragic accident, found dead in the archives, a failed experiment perhaps. His dangerous ideas die with him. That was my cue. I had no weapon, no army. All I had was my voice and the truth. I took a deep breath, centered myself with the moonstone, and pushed open the small, concealed hatch at the back of the great hearth, tumbling out into the study in a cloud of old ash. Both men whirled. Alistair, standing behind his desk, showed only a flicker of surprise. Jackson stared, his triumph morphing into rage. Kaelen, how? Your plan is known, Jackson, I said, rising to my feet, my voice not shouting, but carrying with a resonant certainty I pulled from the very core of my being. I pushed my empathy outward, not at them, but through the walls, a pulse of pure, urgent alarm, betrayal, the king, help. It was a scream on a frequency only my students, my network, could hear. The pack's heart is not so easily silenced. You speak of strength, but you attack in the dark. You speak of purity, but you reek of deceit. Jackson snarled and drew a dagger from his belt. Then I'll do this the old-fashioned way. He lunged, not at Alistair, but at me. I had no time to move, but Alistair did. He moved with the speed of a striking wolf, crossing the space between them. His hand caught Jackson's wrist, twisting it with a sickening crack. The dagger clattered to the floor. He pinned Jackson against the bookshelf, his face a mask of icy fury. The only accident tonight, Alistair growled, will be your fall down the stairs if you resist. At that moment the door burst open, but it wasn't Jackson's guards. It was Raven, covered in trailed dust, his sword drawn. Behind him were Thuron and a unit of loyal warriors, and behind them, wide-eyed but determined, were Myra and Orin. My king, Raven said. We felt a call, we came. Myra looked at me, her face pale but fierce. We heard you, she whispered. Jackson's men, outnumbered and seeing their leader captured, surrendered without a fight. The coup was over, ended in minutes, but as they dragged a cursing Jackson away, the damage was laid bare. The traitor's mark wasn't on the walls, it was on the trust that held the pack together. The enemy wasn't just beyond our borders, they had been sitting at our table. And as I met Alistair's gaze across the room, the relief in his eyes was tempered by a grim acknowledgement. We had survived the knife in the dark, but the war for Shadowfen's soul was just beginning, and the battlefield was now within our own hearts. With Jackson and his inner circle in the dungeons, the pack house was a place of shaken nerves and fragile loyalties. Alistair and Thuron worked tirelessly to root out the rest of the conspiracy, a tedious, ugly process that felt like performing surgery on the pack itself. I threw myself into deciphering the runes. The connection I had almost made before Jackson's intrusion now burned in my mind. With access to the Royal Archives' restricted sections, I found it. The angular script was not Skullville's. It belonged to the Vanished Guild, a pre-shifter society of human psychic artificers said to have been wiped out for creating abominations that could enslave will. Their lore was forbidden, their techniques lost, or so we thought. Someone had found their remnants, and they were not human. The enemy isn't Skullville, I told Alistair and his war council, now a smaller trusted group including Raven, Thuron, and a few steadfast betas. They are clients. The real architect is a disciple of the Vanished Guild, a psychic smith. Skullville provides the protection, the territory, the targets. The smith provides the weapons. A mercenary of the mind, Raven muttered. How do we fight a ghost who can make weapons from thoughts? We find the forge, I said, spreading out the maps. The stones are potent, but they're also anchors. They have to be made somewhere with intense, focused energy, a place of old power, and they have to be transported. Jackson's faction was compromising us from within, slowing our response, maybe even guiding the targets, but the stones came from somewhere. I pointed to a region on the map, a jagged, uninhabited mountain range on the border between Skullville territory and the wildlands beyond. The shattered spires, the archives mention it as a place the guild was said to have drawn power from the world's dream. It's remote, defensible, and ripe with the kind of ley line energy a psychic smith would need. Alistair studied the map. A direct assault would be suicide. They would see us coming for miles, and the terrain is a defender's dream. Not a direct assault, I said, a plan forming, born of desperation and a deep understanding of what we faced. A precision strike, me, and a very small team. Thuron shook his head. Kaelen, no, you are the key to defending against these weapons. Sending you into the heart of their power is madness. It's the only way, I insisted. I can sense the stones, their resonance, I can find the forge. And I am the only one who might be able to disrupt the smith's work, not by force but by offering a different truth, just like at Riverwatch but at the source. If I can break their concentration, shatter their creative focus, even for a moment, it could render them powerless long enough for a strike force to move in. He's right, Alistair said, to everyone's surprise. His eyes were on me, holding that same unnerving certainty. We have been reacting. It is time to act, to cut the head from the serpent, but you will not go alone. Raven, you will lead a team of your 5 best ghosts. You get Kaelen to the forge, that is your only objective. Raven gave a sharp nod, understood. The preparation was swift and silent. We left under cloud cover, a group of 7 looking more like trappers than warriors. The journey to the shattered spires took 5 days of hard, cautious travel. The air grew thin and cold, the forests giving way to bare, wind-scoured rock that looked like broken teeth biting at the sky. The sense of oppressive, twisted psychic energy grew with every step. It was a constant, sickening hum in my bones, worse than any of the individual stones. This was the font of the poison. On the 6th day we found it, a narrow, hidden canyon, invisible until you were upon it. At its head was a cavern mouth glowing with a faint, malevolent violet light. The air smelled of ozone and burnt stone. This was the forge. Raven and his men took up positions on the cliffs overlooking the entrance. We can provide a distraction, draw the guards, but once you're inside, you're on your own, lad. Give the signal, a pulse of that calm of yours, and we'll come in fighting. I nodded, my throat too tight for words. I touched the moonstone, then moved silently down into the canyon. I slipped past 2 Skullville sentries who seemed dull, their minds clouded by the ambient psychic noise. The cavern entrance was huge. Inside, the violet light came from glowing veins in the rock itself, converging on a central chamber. And there I saw the smith. He was not a large man. He was slender, draped in gray robes, his head shaved. He wasn't a shifter. He was human, or something that had once been human. His back was to me as he worked over a stone basin filled with liquid light, his hands moving in intricate patterns, pulling strands of dark energy from the air and weaving them into a new, pulsing red stone, another rage shard. But it was the walls that stole my breath. Dozens of incomplete stones, half-formed nightmares lined the shelves. Despair, oblivion, rage, fear, paranoia, a catalogue of psychic horrors. And in the corner, shackled to the wall with glowing manacles that sapped her will, was a young woman, a shifter. Her aura was a faint, drained thing, but I recognized the empathic potential in her. She was the source. The smith wasn't generating this power himself, he was harvesting it from her, twisting her natural gift into these weapons. Her eyes met mine across the chamber. Desperate, silent pleading. The smith sensed something. He turned. His face was gaunt, his eyes pools of hungry, intelligent malice. He smiled, showing sharp, filed teeth. An emissary from the broken pack, how kind of you to deliver yourself. Your spirit will provide fascinating raw material. He raised a hand, and a wave of pure psychic force, a concentrated blast of the Deepwood's oblivion, slammed into me. My moonstone flared, ice cold, shielding my core, but the edges of my mind frayed. I felt my memories of Myra, of Raven, of Alistair start to slip away, replaced by a numb void. No, I gripped the pendant, focusing on the cold. I remembered the feel of the snow in the courtyard, the smell of herbs in the storeroom, the sound of Alara's voice. I anchored myself in the sensory truth of my own life. I am not raw material, I gritted out, taking a step forward. I am Kaelen of Shadowfen. He laughed, a dry, rustling sound. Names are the first thing to go. He gestured, and the chains on the girl glowed brighter. She whimpered, and a new wave of energy, the despair of Blackstone, rolled toward me. This time I didn't just shield, I opened myself. I let the despair in, and I showed it what I had shown the shard. I filled it with the image of Caden's salute, of the Riverwatch folk embracing after the rage passed, of the king's weary, loving resolve. I turned his own weapon into a conduit for my truth. The smith staggered, his smile faltering. You reshape, interesting. He wasn't angry. He was fascinated, a collector seeing a new specimen. He gathered his power again, this time drawing directly from the terrified girl, a mix of all the poisons, a psychic storm of hate, fear, and void aimed at erasing me completely. I couldn't counter this. It was too vast, too complex. So I didn't try to counter it. I turned to the girl. I locked my eyes with hers, past the chains, past the pain. I poured every ounce of my empathy, my calm, my recognition toward her. I showed her she was not a tool, she was a person. She had a name, she was seen. Your power is yours, I sent the thought, clear as a bell through the storm. It is beautiful. It is for healing, not for this. Take it back. Her eyes, dull with defeat, sparked, a flare of gold in the violet gloom. She understood. As the smith's amalgamated horror reached for me, the girl in the corner took a deep, shuddering breath, and she pulled. The raging energies faltered, diverted. The power flowed back into her, not as a twisted weapon, but as a pure, healing light. The manacles on her wrists shattered. The smith screamed, a sound of rage and loss. No, you ruin everything. He lunged for her, but I was closer. I threw myself between them, taking the brunt of his physical charge. We crashed to the stone floor. He was stronger than he looked, his hands scrabbling for my throat, but then a warm, golden light enveloped us. The girl stood over us, her hands outstretched, her face serene with unleashed power. She poured calm, pure, and undiluted into the smith, into the very air of the forge. The violet light in the cavern veins flickered and died. The half-formed stones on the shelves cracked, becoming inert rock. The smith's struggles ceased, his malicious mind overwhelmed by a peace he could not comprehend. He went limp, unconscious. The silence that followed was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I sent the pulse, a wave of clear, triumphant calm to Raven. The forge was broken. The source of the shadow was extinguished. We had won. But as I looked at the freed girl, who smiled at me with tears of gratitude, I knew the war wasn't over. Skullville still stood, and we had just stolen their greatest weapon. Their retaliation would not be subtle, it would be a hammer of flesh and blood. The battle of minds was over. The real bloodshed was about to begin. We returned to Shadowfen with the unconscious psychic smith as our prisoner and the freed girl, whose name was Alara, a cruel coincidence that felt like fate under my protection. The news of the forge's destruction spread like wildfire, a bolt of lightning to shatter the lingering gloom from Jackson's betrayal. The pack's spirit, so long under assault, soared, but Alpha King Alistair did not celebrate. In the War Council, his face was granite. "We have cut off the hand," he said, "but the beast remains. Skullville Alpha Vargas will not accept this loss. He will see it as an unforgivable insult and a strategic disaster. He will come, not with shadows, but with every warrior he can muster. He will seek to crush us utterly, to prove his strength is the only kind that matters." He was right. Our scouts confirmed it within days. The Skullville pack was massing at the Serpent's Pass, the traditional invasion route. thousands of warriors. This was no raid. It was an all-out war for territory and vengeance. The pack mobilized. Forges now hammered out steel, not psychic stones. Training fields echoed with the shouts of drills. The air thrummed with a different kind of tension, the sharp, clean fear of impending battle. My role shifted again. I was no longer just an empath or an advisor. With the network of students I had trained, I became a coordinator of morale. We moved among the warriors not to fight but to fortify. We soothed raw nerves, bolstered courage, and ensured the bonds of brotherhood were strong. We were the glue holding the spirit of the army together. The night before the forces were to march south to meet Skullville at the pass, Alistair summoned me to the ramparts. The pack house spread below us, a constellation of torchlight in the vast dark. "When I first saw you," he said, his voice quiet against the wind, "you were a defiant shadow in the snow. I saw a puzzle, then a tool, then an ally." He turned to me, his pale eyes gleaming in the starlight. I was wrong each time. I waited, my heart in my throat. "You are not a puzzle to be solved, a tool to be used, or an ally of convenience, Kaelen. You are the conscience of this pack. You are the proof that our strength is multifaceted. You have reminded us all what we are fighting for, not just land or pride, but for the right to be a community where every gift has value." He placed a hand on my shoulder, a gesture of equality that would have been unthinkable a year ago. "I do not know what tomorrow brings, but know this: whatever happens, you have already changed Shadowfen forever. You have taken your step forward, and this pack, will never step back from you again." He left me then to his final preparations. I stood on the wall, the moonstone cool against my skin, and looked out at the territory I had fought for in such a strange war. I was an Omega. I would not wield a sword on the morrow, but I would be there. My students and I would be at the rear, a field hospital of the spirit, tending to the broken minds and shattered courage, fighting our own kind of battle. The two armies met at dawn in the Serpent's Pass, a narrow defile of gray rock, Shadowfen in black and silver, Skullvale in blood red and ochre. The air was filled with the smell of damp earth, cold metal, and the primal scent of wolf. I stood on a rise behind our lines with Myra and Alara, our combined calm extending a gentle dome over our section of the army, a buffer against the tsunami of fear and rage about to be unleashed. Alpha Vargas, a mountain of fur and muscle in his war form, gave a roar that shook stones from the cliffs. The charge began. The battle was a nightmare of noise and chaos. Steel rang on steel, snarls and screams echoed off the stone walls. From my vantage, I saw the lines ebb and flow, a violent, bloody dance, but I also saw our work in action. Where a Shadowfen warrior wavered, facing overwhelming odds, a pulse of steady courage from one of my network would shore up his resolve. Where panic threatened to spread, we doused it with calm. We were the unseen current, strengthening the fabric of our army stitch by psychic stitch. The tide turned slowly, brutally. Skullville fought with the desperate fury of the cornered, but Shadowfen, its spirit unified and its purpose clear, fought with the disciplined ferocity of those defending their home. Then I saw him. Alistair in his powerful war form, a silver wolf locked in combat with Vargas's monstrous brown one. It was a clash of titans, a duel that would decide the battle. I felt Alistair's focus, his fatigue, a flicker of pain as Vargas's claws found his flank. And I felt Vargas's mind, a cauldron of arrogance and blistering rage at his ruined plans. I could not intervene physically. But I remembered the smith's forge. I remembered offering a different truth. I closed my eyes, and with Myra and Alara amplifying me, I did not send calm to Alistair. He had enough. I sent a single, sharp, focused thought into the heart of Vargas's rage as he reared over Alistair. "You have already lost, your weapons are dust, your ally is broken, your strength is all you have left, and it is not enough. You fight for nothing." It was not an attack, it was a mirror held up to the emptiness of his cause. Vargas hesitated. For a fraction of a second, the blind rage cleared and he saw the truth, his shattered schemes, the determined faces of the Shadowfen warriors, the futility. In that moment of doubt, Alistair struck. It was over. The death of their alpha broke the Skullville will, their lines crumbled, the retreat turned into a rout, Shadowfen held the field, the cost was high, the pass was littered with the fallen of both packs, but we had survived. We had won. As the sun began to set, casting long, bloody shadows, I walked down from the rise into the aftermath. I went to the field hospital not to treat wounds of flesh but of spirit. I sat with warriors trembling from shock, with those who had seen too much, offering quiet, offering peace. Alistair found me there later, his human form bandaged and weary, but his eyes alive. He didn't speak. He simply looked at me, at the omegas and deltas working beside me, healing the invisible wounds. He saw the new pack emerging from the ashes of the old. He gave a slow, deep nod, an acknowledgement, a promise. The Alpha King had led the charge. But the Omega had held the line, not the line of battle, but the line of what it meant to be pack. And in the end, that line had held firm. The war was over. The long, hard work of building a lasting peace was about to begin. And for the first time in the history of Shadowfen, an Omega would have a voice in what that peace would look like. My step forward was now a permanent place at the table, and the pack stood firmly at my side. The Omega took one step forward. The pack took one step back, and the Alpha King, he stepped forward to meet me, and together we walk a new path. The end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Hit the bell icon so you never miss the next part, and comment if you want part 2. And if you'd like to give an extra boost of support to our creative team, you can also send a super thanks. It helps us continue bringing you stories like this.